Now, hello everyone, and you are very welcome to our latest instalment of the Ireland Women's Book Club. And I'm delighted to say that Diane Caldwell and Amber Barrett are with me. And today we are going to read Emerald Exiles, or we've already read it. We're going to discuss Emerald Exiles by Barry Landy, and it is a book about lots of Irish players who have made their mark all around the world in football. And what I'm going to start with, because which I think is fantastic, and Amber, I know we've spoken in the past about women's football and the progress that needed to be made, but there's an awful lot of women in this book, which is a really good starting point and a really good sign, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that when you read the book, you can see there's so many women have went to so many different parts of Europe and around the world. But I think it's so funny to see the likes of Anne O'Brien, who went to Italy so long ago, and we had our own. Louise Quinn was there last year, Stephanie Rhodes a few years ago, and it's mad to see that 50 years ago that this was a possibility. And even me and Diane were talking about it, how something that when we grew up playing, that obviously to play professional football would have been something, of course, a dream, but a realistic dream maybe not. And then for Anne O'Brien to do this 50 years ago is just something that it is fantastic. And the book is littered with such fantastic stories and different women crossing paths in different places, and it really is fantastic.
Hear Anne O'Brien's story, and I think we're all worse off because we never got to see her play. We didn't know her. I didn't know her when I was younger. I only got to hear about her after she passed away and to read her story. 42 did a brilliant article on her, and then obviously to read about her in this book as well is brilliant. But when you think about the situation she would have been grown up in, where it was not the norm at all for women to play football. She would have been out with the boys, and even just to make that journey to go off and make her way in the world, to head off to France and to Italy, she deserves so much credit because she really paved the way for everybody and for the likes of you guys with your own experiences as well.
Yeah, she was an absolute pioneer, and it's a little bit unfortunate that we've only just started to hear of her story within the last few years. Because like you said, for someone like herself growing up in the 70s, I mean, there's obviously certain perceptions of how young women should, live their lives, and for her to go off and achieve that. And she's actually the most decorated player in Irish footballing history with all of the titles that she's won. So again, reading her story in the book, it's just phenomenal to read that, and it's an inspiration for all of us.
Yeah, and you need people that are going to inspire you. I'm reading your story, Diane, and about the connection with Claire Scanlon, the fact that she was over in Japan and she'd been in America and been around so much and then came back again. Tell us a little bit, for anyone that might not have read the book, just about your story in this, and your encounter with the man on the train almost, and how you ended up connecting with Claire.
Yeah, it was, a completely kind of random story. And I think that's what Barry really liked, and he kept it in the book. But I was just a young girl going off to secondary school on the train, and I got to know this man who was also very interested in soccer. And he was my connection then to Claire Scanlon just through his best friend. So Claire Scanlon's father was his best friend, basically. And he just got me in touch with Claire and said, look, she's an Irish international and she's playing abroad, and this was just unbelievable to me, to know of this and that it even existed. And he took me to some of the games into Richmond Park, I think it was back then that they started to play a few games. Richmond Park, Tulka Park. And like I said, just got me in connection with Claire, and she showed me her caps, a collection, and I was just in awe of this girl and what she was doing and achieving. And it was just, again, she was a role model for me, really, and made me realize that my dream could be achieved and it was possible.
And that's so important, Amber, as well, because we talk about pathways, and one thing that was really clear from reading this book is that those pathways weren't there. People didn't know how to become professional footballers. They didn't know how football and where football was played, what corners of the world, how they could go on a journey. And often it was a case of, it was writing letters, trying to figure things out yourself, chance encounters, all that sort of stuff. But to have people now who will have been, even just to pick up this book, and will have been all over the world, and now in Germany, and obviously Diane will have been there before you, to even have somebody like Diane there, Amber, who would have went and traveled the road before you, just to be able to pick up the phone to her and ask what's it like. How beneficial has that been?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that from reading the book, as I said to you, there's so many different stories, that there's some connection, whether it's been going to the same club, whether it's going to the same country. And I think for me, I know going to Germany was obviously a huge step, coming from playing in the National League and going abroad. And I know that lots of conversations with Diane and talking to me about the Bundesliga and playing at that level, and also playing for Cologne, because a lot of people don't know that Diane actually had a short stint in Cologne as well. And I think I was lucky at the time because both Diane and Claire Reardon were both in Germany the year I moved. So I think that I was lucky in that sense that I was able to then say, is there any little piece of advice you can give to me? And I think now with Diane is now used to work with the coach that I have. So like I was able then to get a good idea of how he operates and what he would kind of expect. And I think probably more so with Claire Reardon because of how close we are logistically between Duisburg and Cologne. I think that Claire has been really, really beneficial to me in terms of, I suppose, bouncing ideas off her, what do you think about this? And, should I be frustrated at this? And I think everybody needs somebody to give shed a wee bit of light on it. And I definitely think Claire and them were very helpful for me in that regard.
It was actually like interesting. I obviously know who Claire is, but I didn't realize her story, and how late she came to the game and how hard she had to work. And as well as, I guess, understanding how the careers have developed. The book also gives you an insight into people's personalities as well, Diane. And we're having a few book clubs now and we're talking about women's sport and books about women's sport, and they're only in the whole of women's sport is only in its infancy, but it's like an added bonus to learn a little bit about the people that you might not have known so much about. And for me, Claire is one of them.
Yeah, definitely. And the book is a perfect insight into that, and a little bit kind of a behind the scenes look, and you find out information that you wouldn't necessarily know about players. The book does a really great job of that, and again kind of highlights just the challenge that it took for players to go abroad. It's obviously a bit more of a road less traveled. Obviously the UK was kind of the predominant, most attractive option, but the book does a good job of highlighting the challenges faced for those that went further afield, and it's obviously more of a unique and probably, I think, more of a difficult challenge to be faced with, obviously language barriers and differences in culture. So I think it's a really good insight into not only personalities, but those challenges that they faced when abroad.
And there are challenges, there's no getting away from that. But there's a lot of highs as well, Amber. And I think Louise Quinn's experience in Sweden was quite enlightening, just how much a team can be part of a community, because often when we look at women's football, I think maybe especially around here, and it's just starting to grow now, the connections with the communities are just starting to form. Crowds are starting to increase, as we saw in the FAI Cup final where there was a record crowd. There's record crowds at your games, and we can see it growing in front of our eyes. But Louise had that experience where she was part of a club in Sweden and it became a huge part of the community, and she was there to see the growth of it and understood what it took, whether it was been in charge of bake sales, going out handing out flyers, all that sort of stuff that is part of women's football that we often don't get to see, but is still really important in growing the game.
Yeah, and I think what was really interesting about Louise's story is that they always say the best way to grow something is you nearly have to go and put a face to a name, and like things like bake sales and going out and handing out flyers and meeting the local people will remember that then. And I do think that's something that is really, really special to women's football. We have such a fantastic, relationship with crowds, with fans. We get, it's not often you see it that, you can spend so much time after a game with fans, taking pictures, signing autographs. But the thing is as well, I've learned from different people is that people remember that, and it makes people more willing to come back the next day because they want to meet someone else and they want to get to know someone else. And I think, reflecting back on Louise's journey, I think the reason it developed was because the women's were so hands-on in many ways outside of the football pitch, that they were willing to do those things for the club. And then you build up a repertoire with people, and then it's again suddenly people want to come to the games, and then they tell their friends and they tell their families, and then it grows and grows. And I think you look as well at the cup final yesterday, the crowd, a couple of years ago, to say that there would have been that amount of people in Tallaght for a cup final when the Irish senior women's team weren't getting that type of crowd. And it just shows you that I think the hands-on approach that a lot of female athletes have is a huge coming back factor to that, and I think it makes it really special to be involved in that way.
Yeah, it must do. Another key point I found as well, Diane, is that although often we are only exposed to the good side of the game, and we see the matches and we see the wins and we hear about the records and all the rest, but it's not always plain sailing. And I think Stephanie Roach's story really highlights that. And I think as well, like, she's really brave to tell it for what it is, because, you know, a lot of people will only think of Stephanie Roach and think of the Puskas Award, and, you know, that picture of her with the Messi and Ronaldo when she's walking in front of them, and she just looks $1 million, and it looks so glamorous, and it's like she's got the world at her feet. But the reality ended up being far different. And just to hear that journey about her, you know, just going to France and not working out, and then the difficulty getting injured in America, and then being in Italy, and, you know, not even being paid. But that is the reality of women's football. It doesn't matter if you're one of the biggest stars going, things often don't work out the way you want them to.
No, 100%, absolutely. And I think every player in their career can attest to, you know, stories like Steph's. You know, never is plain sailing. It's never how you imagine it or envision it. There's always going to be ups and downs and challenges along the way. But again, yeah, the book highlights that it's not always just so easy, and that's the reality. You know, like you said, it's often you hear about the glamorous stuff, but it's really, for me, I think the journey behind it all that's the most intriguing, and what players have to overcome and what challenges they've faced really, I think, is the interesting part of it. And you really find out the characters behind the names and everything that they've had to deal with. So again, it's a really inspiring, and you can relate to it in your own career as well. You know, it's never as easy as you hoped it would be.
Amber and I, we did a book review a few weeks back, and it was a lot of the untold stories in women's football, and some of them were quite harrowing, and we were kind of hoping that a lot of them were you know, things that had happened in the past. But still, when you think that there are players out there who are going to sign professional contracts, Amber, and, you know, they're in situations where they're going to Italy where you think it's going to be great and glamorous, and then, you know, they're not getting paid and they're not getting treated properly. And, you know, that's highlighted in the book as well, that the reality there isn't what we want it to be. And it's still frustrating to think that this is, you know, modern day football, and a lot of it is reflective of what happened in the past.
Yeah, and there's a really good line that Steph in Steph's chapter where it mentioned that in an article she later admitted that she accepted the contract having absolutely no idea what an average wage for a women's player was. And like, I think from my own personal experience, I was very lucky that at the time I didn't have an agent, but obviously the former manager Colin was very helpful to me, and he looked at all that, and he made sure that I was looked after. Because again, if I had been going there off my own back with absolutely no support, I could have got handed any type of contract and expected. I thought, oh Jesus, this is brilliant. Because we just look at the numbers like, yeah, that's fine, but then you won't take into consideration rent, you know, living and all of this. And I think in so many different ways, you think about players that maybe leave home, and they might come to America, they might come to Europe, and they're hoping for this opportunity to play, and they get caught in those situations where it's like, yeah, I want to play, and then they give you the contract, and they're like, yeah, I'll sign the contract, but, you know, there's so many little loopholes and stipulations in the contract that they might have not been aware of. And I think in those regards, you hope that things are improving all the time. But you look at Steph's situation, that's not a long time ago. That is only a few years back. And I think things have definitely improved. But, you know, in many regards, I know that if you went somewhere else and was able to dig deep enough, you probably would find another story very similar to that, maybe even recently. And I think that for women's football to really progress, I think it was Melanie Leopolds did an interview during the week where she talked about that, you know, the equal pay isn't this, that women are getting hundreds of thousands a week of money for contracts. It's that we have the same access to stadiums, training facilities, gyms, and looked after in that regard. And to be honest, I think that's what most women and players want. They want the exposure to those high performance, and then obviously the money thing will improve over time. But, you know, it's not just, oh yeah, give them 100,000 a week, that will keep them happy. There's so many other things, and I really hope that over the next few years that things will really, really kick on and develop in that regard as well.
I think it was when Claire was in Japan, when she was talking about the training on the dirt pitches and you know, just how difficult it was. But then they go play a match and they would play in these amazing stadiums, and the perception would be formed then that that's what they have all the time. But that was all that's what we were seeing. which probably does sum up a lot of what women's football is. You know, you see the big days and, you know, the big stadiums and those 90 minutes of under lights when everybody's watching, but the reality of what's happening behind the scenes seems a lot different. And like, I think Steph, her story as well of having to get the 2 trains and then the bus and then walk 25 minutes just to get to training is probably more of a reality for women's football. And it's not just those 90 minutes in the big stadium. It's, as Amber said, they're trying to get everything to a level so that it's equality of opportunity across the board, not just on the big day.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where the women's game needs to progress, because like you said, and like Amber said, kind of superficially, sometimes it can look great on the outside, but you need to know what's going on behind the scenes. And that's when all these stories start coming out, like of bad facilities, bad structure, bad admin, stuff like this, which is sometimes the reality of the women's game, but the challenge to take the game forward and really progress it to the level that it can be and has the potential to be.
And just given your experience, Diane, the fact that you have been all around the world and back again now at this stage, you've been to so many clubs, you've had such a varied career in different countries and now in the United States. Do you feel that it's moving in the right direction? Like, are we evolving the way you would like it to go?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, from when I began, I've literally experienced everything. You know, I've experienced playing at such an amateur level just for the love of the game to now making a living from it, and having played at so many different environments, from the basic, from the bare minimum to the elite and one of the best in the world. It's an amazing journey, and to see the women's game progress within that time. And I'm just kind of still so lucky to be still part of it, and experiencing it at first hand, because I know there's a few people that have paved the way before me that hasn't kind of reaped the benefits of their work. You know, they've maybe retired before it really started to blossom and bloom. So I'm just glad to be still playing and playing my part in that. And again, just see the game evolve. It's really encouraging and great to experience and witness.
Yeah, it really is. Guys, thank you so much. And please do check out Emerald Exiles. So many brilliant stories and so many insights into the women's game all around the world, and seeing Irish players represented in so many different leagues. And there are some really interesting male stories as well there too that are worth checking out. And it must be pretty sweet as well to be on the same pages as the likes of Liam Brady and Robbie Keane and some of the biggest stars that we've ever had. But our women are well deserved of their place in this book as well. So thank you, everybody. And we'll be back soon with another episode.